Welcome to our today's webinar. I'll call upon the Town Planners Chair to welcome us for the event before I proceed.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Juliet Rita. I'm the Chair, Town Planners Chapter at the Architectural Association of Kenya. And we are happy to have you today as we discuss the street design manual. We have today a webinar which is co-hosted with ITDP, that's the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy. Basically, this is a non-profit organization, and they have played a key role in advising many cities across Africa: Cairo, Addis Ababa, Mombasa, Kisumu here in Kenya, Kampala, Kigali, and other cities on high quality public transportation system, as well as how they can improve the street environment. So we are very eager to hear from them in terms of the new document that they have, the street design manual. And it's an interesting tool that we are going to learn more about today. But I'll not take so much of your time. Our moderator today is James Odongo. And before we go to the main webinar, I'm going to invite our president, architect and planner Mugure Jendu, just to say hi before we go into the webinar. Asante.
All right, thank you very much, Madam Chair Juliet, and moderator, Planner James Odongo, who's also the R&A advocacy manager at AAK. I think for me, it's going to be very brief, just to firstly appreciate all the people who have taken the time to attend this session. We know as an association that we do hold many sessions and people have webinar fatigue. But we're happy to see that 47 of you have gotten past that fatigue to join us today for this very important topic. So to appreciate each and every one of you who has plugged in today. This topic is not important only to planners, but built environment professionals across the board. So I'm happy to see that we do have a few engineers, we have some landscape architects, we have some quantity surveyors on this session. It really is a topic that is important to all of us across the board. Also, just to appreciate the Town Planners Chapter for holding this conversation, and to ITDP as well, who have always kept AK engaged, kept us up to speed with what they're undertaking, talked to us as they're undergoing various projects. So we do appreciate each and every one of the panelists here today as well. Engineer Nancy Njeri, thank you. Constant Cap, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. So without much further ado, just to welcome you to this conversation for the AK members, those who are logged into this conversation, please engage with us as much as you can, and we appreciate you. Asante sana. Over to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Without further ado, I will welcome James, and remember to follow us also on Facebook Live, as well as we are on Twitter, hashtag AK webinar, hashtag street design. So welcome, James.
Welcome, James.
Okay, thank you very much, Planner Rita. Okay, I'll introduce myself again. My name is James Odongo. I'm in charge of research and advocacy at AAK. So maybe just to set us off, I'll outline some housekeeping rules in terms of we'll require that everyone keeps on mute unless we are speaking. Then we'll also need to remember for participants and the attendants for that matter, we will be posting our questions on the chat box as the conversation continues. And maybe at the end of the session, we can engage our panelists. Of course, when sharing your question, try and be specific in directing the question to a particular panelist. So maybe to start us off, I will introduce our panelists. I will start by Planner Constant Cap. He's a senior product manager at Code for Africa. and the Africa Census Environmental Monitoring Program. He writes and comments about urban planning issues online and in local and international media. Born and raised here in Kenya, Nairobi, Kenya, he's passionate about the planning issues facing Africa and has deep interest in sustainable mobility, urban resilience and inclusivity, as well as advocacy and research relating to planning and mobility throughout the country. So Constant is also a director and convener of Naipolitans, a think and do tank within the urban planning space. Welcome, Planner Constant Cap. So the next will be the team from ITDP, led by Engineer Nancy Mburu, Nancy Njeri Mburu. She holds an engineering degree and an MBA from the University of Nairobi. She's a professional engineer registered by the Engineers Board of Kenya and a corporate member of the AAK. She has attended, among others, various training in urban transport, including one at the Galilee Institute of Management in Israel, at the University of Cape Town, South Africa, on a course relating to non-motorized transport for cities. She's also attended a training for leaders in urban transport planning within in Seoul, South Korea. So Engineer Njeri has previous exposure to best practice in bus rapid transport systems and NMT in various cities, including Dar es Salaam, Colombia, and Seoul. She previously worked within the Kiambu County as a member in charge of transport, as a CEC in charge of transport in Governor Kabogo's cabinet. She has 7 years experience in sustainable transport planning and implementation. Our next panelist will be Engineer Justus. Engineer Justus Otwani is a civil engineering consultant. He's also a member of AAK and the vice chair of the AAK Engineers Chapter. He's also a member of the Institute of Engineers of Kenya. He has a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering degree and a Master of Project Planning and Management. Then the next panelists who will be assisting Engineer Njeri in the presentation of the model plan would be Gabriel Gitau from ITDP. He's the Transport Planning Associate. Gabriel is a holder of a civil engineering degree from JKUAT. He's also pursuing a Master of Transport Engineering from the University of Nairobi. He has 5 years experience in sustainable transport planning, including design and supervision of road construction projects, data collection, preparing service plans for BRTs in Nairobi and Mombasa, as well as NMT design and implementation. Finally, we have Penina Ndego, also from ITDP. Penina is also a transport planning associate at ITDP. She's a first-class honors degree in urban and regional planning. She was ahead of me by a year from the University of Nairobi. She's also currently undertaking a master's degree in climate change adaptation, still at the University of Nairobi. She's a transport planner, keen on, and a sustainability enthusiast, keen on use of new technologies to build resilient and adaptive sustainable cities that improve the quality of life, especially for women and children. Her professional experience includes planning a design of NMTs, TODs, and BRTs, as well as parking management. Penina's interest for the future is to design and advocate for children-friendly cities, climate change, and sustainable transport. Welcome to the discussion panelists. So as it is, I'll invite over Engineer Nancy to make the presentation. Welcome, Engineer.
Thank you, James. 1 minute. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, yes. You can proceed.
Okay. Thank you very much, James. And I want to welcome the participants to this presentation. We'll be discussing the street design manual. It's still in draft form, and it is going through the public participation process. I'll start by introducing ITDP. We are a non-governmental organization, and we are working throughout the world, promoting equitable and sustainable transport. Our headquarters is in New York. Now, the street design manual is a document by the Ministry of Transport, who have partnered with the ITDP to develop this manual. The initiative is supported by Global Road Safety Facility through World Bank and International Climate Initiative. The street design manual development process has undergone a consultation process. We have held stakeholder engagement meetings with the Ministry of Transport. We have been having meetings with the road agencies, the KENHA, the KURA, KERA. We have also had meetings with the counties, the Council of Governors, the Mombasa County, Kisumu County, Namata, among others. So this meeting is part of the public participation process. So why do we need street design standards? Perhaps the first question we need to ask is, how do our urban residents move around? We find the new trip, the JICA master plan for Nairobi, it was done in 2014, indicates that 40% of Nairobi residents walk and 41% use public transport. For Mombasa, we find that 45% of the people walk and 36% use public transport, and only 3% use private cars. For Kisumu, we have a whole 53% of the residents who walk on a daily basis. This is from a study which was done by ITDP. 13% are using matatus, and only 6% are using their private vehicles. But when you come to the situation on the ground, you find that the streets provide for vehicle movement. They also provide for parking for cars, but they do not provide for walking facilities, no cycling facilities, no spaces for people to meet and chat or discuss business, and no dedicated spaces for street vending. And you can see in this photo, a lot of investments have gone into the carriageway for vehicles, but no investments have been made towards the NMT or non-motorized transport facilities. These pedestrians have nowhere to walk. Again, you can see here, this is a part of Outer Ring Road. And you can see this gentleman who is walking with a child. They can only walk on the carriageway because there is no facility for walking, and it's quite unsafe. Where there are facilities for walking and cycling, they are not properly designed often. And you can see like this cycle track and the can you hear me? The cycle track and the NMT end up in stormwater drain, and there is no facility for crossing the stormwater drainage. So it provides a lot of difficulties for the people who are using the facilities. Again, this is Outer Ring Road. You can see the cycle track there. It's not continuous. You have a curb there. And if somebody is using the cycle track, they would have to stop and maneuver their way around the curb. You can also see a lot of debris, a lot of silt there because the cycle track is part of the stormwater drainage. And also issues of road safety. This is Kisumu, Nairobi Highway in Kisumu. And you can see these children are trying to cross this highway. It's very wide, it's very unsafe, and there is no crossing facility. And these children have to use this, they have to cross this road every day in the morning and in the evening. So you can imagine against all the speeding vehicles, it is actually very unsafe. Another very major challenge is the congestion that we're having in our urban areas. This is Thika Road. Thika Road was commissioned about 8 years ago in 2012. And already you can see that it's very congested. You can spend up to 2 hours commuting on Thika Road towards the city center. So what has been established by many cities is that just widening roads that does not actually solve the problem of traffic congestion. It only provides a short-term benefits. It ends up attracting more cars so that at the end of the day, you're dealing with a worse traffic congestion than you started with. So it's very important that we shift from focusing on the car in our designs to focusing on all modes of transport, including public transport, cycling, and walking. And it is happening in Dar es Salaam. This is Morogoro Road. It's a corridor in the Dar es Salaam city. It's a BRT corridor. And you can see they have provided a very nice wide walkway. There is a very nice facility for cycling. There are dedicated lanes for public transport. And finally, you provide for the mixed traffic, the personal cars and other motorized traffic. So looking at that, you can see all the road users are catered for in this design. And now we have the major problem of COVID-19, which is causing a lot of challenges in our urban areas, in transportation, in the urban areas, and especially where it comes to the public transport because of the issue of social distancing and the fear of getting infected. So many cities are trying to address this issue by providing cycle tracks, what we're calling the pop-up cycle tracks. And these ones are done, they're temporary measures. They're just done by painting the carriageway. You take some space on the carriageway, install some bollards to protect the cyclists, and also paint the carriageway to separate the cycle track from the vehicles. And these cycle tracks can be converted in future to permanent cycle tracks. And we can also borrow the same leaf from this and start taking some of our carriageway and converting into cycle tracks. So how do highways compare with urban streets? You can see the photo on your left. It shows a typical highway. A typical highway will focus on uninterrupted movement of vehicles, high speed movement of vehicles. And that is why you normally find often we have the footbridges so that we can remove the pedestrians from the road. for the vehicles to be able to move even faster. You also, you find that such a design does not provide for pedestrians, the NMTs, and it does not also provide for public transport. At the end of the day, you find that everybody is everywhere. It's a chaotic situation where people are walking on the carriageway, where matatus are parked on the NMT, and everybody ends up being inconvenienced on the road. In contrast, when you look at an urban street design, every road user has their space. You can see the public transport has its space, the mixed traffic, there are lanes for the mixed traffic, and you have separate safe NMTs on the side. And you also have crossing facilities to improve safety for pedestrians. The vehicles are slowed down so that the pedestrians are safe as they move around. Yes, now that was just a brief background. I want now to get into the manual itself, the street design manual itself. I'll start by giving you a brief outline of the content. It has 8 chapters, starting with the introduction in chapter 1. Chapter 2 discusses complete street design principles. Then there is chapter 3 on priority networks, chapter 4 on street elements. Chapter 5 discusses street templates. Chapter 6 is on intersections. And chapter 7 talks about the design process. And finally, we have chapter 8, which has a summary of design checklist. I'm going to go through the first 3 chapters, and then I'm going to invite my colleague, Penina, to continue. You find that we have many laws, regulations, and policies which are supporting this kind of standards. We have the Constitution of Kenya of 2010, which guarantees every citizen of this country the right to freedom of movement. It also guarantees the people of Kenya the right to a clean and healthy environment. Public officers are mandated, they are required under the Constitution to address the needs of vulnerable members of the society. We also have the Integrated National Transport Policy of 2009, which fully supports efficient and effective public transport and NMT. It also recommends restricted access of private cars in our urban areas through travel demand management. We have the Traffic Act of 2015, which provides a maximum speed of 50 kilometers per hour in urban areas, and speed controls, especially in the next to schools and other educational institutions. It also prohibits driving on pedestrian walkways. We have the National Climate Change Action Plan, and some of its targets. Number 1 is that 70 kilometers of BRT corridors are going to be constructed in Nairobi by 2023. We also have a target of 150 kilometers of non-motorized transport facilities in our urban areas by 2023, and also introduction of hybrid buses and planning regulations that encourage compact land use and reduced provision for parking. Chapter 2 discusses the complete design principles. This street design manual is based on 5 principles, and the first principle is road safety. We find that we are losing from the NTSA data that we get every so often. We are losing about 3,000 people, residents of this country, to road fatalities. And one of the reasons why this is happening is because vehicles are moving very fast in the urban areas. We need to slow down the vehicles. You find that below 30 kilometers per hour, if a pedestrian is hit by a motorist, chances of surviving are 90%. But anywhere beyond 50 kilometers per hour, the injuries will be quite serious or even fatal. The second principle is efficient use of road space. You find that a space, if we have a road space, that space can, if we design it for cars, it can only carry maybe around 3,000 people per hour using cars. But the same space can be, by introducing high capacity dedicated lanes for public transport, we can be able to transport even up to 45,000 passengers per direction per hour. So you can see by introducing dedicated lanes for public transport, we can be able to use the same space to transport very many people. The third principle is universal access. Our streets must provide access, comfortable, safe, and efficient access for everybody, all the road users, including people with disability, little children, our elderly, our brothers and sisters, or our mothers and fathers. It should also take care of expectant mothers. Everybody should be well taken care of. The designs of the urban streets should also be gender sensitive. You find that men and women travel differently. Often you'll find women will be carrying children. They'll be having luggage. Sometimes they are expectant mothers. And there are also issues of security. The way women perceive security in a street is very different from the way men would perceive issues of security. So when we design the streets, if we design with our ladies in mind, that street will be safe, comfortable, and good for everybody. And we found that we did a study in Kisumu, and we established that actually more women, a higher proportion of women are walking than men. We established that 60% of the women in Kisumu walk, while 44% of the men walk. The fifth principle is the model hierarchy. District design manual prioritizes pedestrians, followed by cyclists, followed by public transport. Then comes the freight, moving cars, and finally the parked cars. And you might ask why. The first reason is that walking is free. Walking does not pollute the environment. Majority of our urban residents walk. And also the cycling also does not pollute the environment, and it's easy, it's affordable. Public transport, again, is the mode of transport for very many of our urban area residents. Yeah, now I'll go briefly into chapter 3 on priority networks. The Street Design Manual for Urban Areas in Kenya prioritizes the pedestrian network. We need to provide in the urban zones easy access for pedestrians, very easy networks for the pedestrians, small blocks, so that it's very easy to walk around the city, and you should be able to use different routes to access your destination. The pedestrian networks should also be well integrated with the public transport system. The second priority network is the cycle network. We need to provide dedicated lanes for cyclists, especially on the major highways, major corridors, because this is where the vehicles are moving very fast. So for our cyclists to be safe, they need to have dedicated cycle tracks. This will also encourage more people to cycle so that we have less people using their private cars. This is a cycle network for Kisumu. And you find that when you have a ready cycle network, it's like a master plan, and it can be used to guide or to inform future extension of the cycling facilities. Another priority network is a public transport network. For Mombasa, Nairobi, and Kisumu, the digital matatus has provided mapping for the routes for the matatus in these cities. And this can be used to guide the designs of the streets so that where there are matatu routes, we provide bus shelters, we provide pedestrian crossings, we provide bus stops to facilitate public transport, even for the paratransit, the matatus, and all the paratransit transport vehicles. We also have a master plan for the BRT for Nairobi. It's very important that any development which is happening on any of these corridors takes into consideration the BRT and provides adequately for the BRT infrastructure. We do not want a situation where we are developing highways or corridors, and then later we decide, oh, we need a BRT on this corridor, like what is happening on Thika Road. We now are trying to bring in the BRT. It becomes very expensive to try and retrofit the BRT when the infrastructure is already in place. I will now invite Penina, my colleague Penina, to present chapter 4 on street elements. Penina.
Yes, thank you so much, Engineer, for the good presentation. Let me start my video. Let me share my screen. What happened? I left immediately. Oh, okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So I'll be taking you through the street elements of just any street elements in cities, urban areas, and all that. So when you think of streets, what comes into your mind? Those are the words of Jane Jacobs, one of the very great street transport planners in the history. And if you think of Kenyatta Avenue, for example, you'll think of the footpaths that you will see, the cycle track maybe that are not existing, the vendors who probably are hawking, the vehicles, the carriageways, the bus stops that exist, the pedestrian crossings, and all those things. So basically that's what I'll be taking you through, anything that you just see on the street. And I'll start with the footpaths. Footpaths, it's basically a space dedicated for pedestrians. And how we design footpaths is that you need to have a clear pedestrian zone. It's divided into 3 zones. That is pedestrian zone, frontage zone, and the furniture zone. So the pedestrian zone is usually a continuous 2 meters width, an obstructed space. That is the one that you see people walking on. It should be unobstructed to ensure that people are comfortably walking without necessarily being obstructed by objects, maybe the vendors, trees, the flower pots, and all that. The frontage zone is just the area outside the shops. Sometimes that can be used for probably displaying wares of the shop owners, or maybe putting some little landscaping on the street. Then the furniture zone is usually the part where we put on some street furniture and landscaping. Sometimes you have trees, you have sometimes bus stops, property signage, and all that. So this is an example of a good street. This, of course, I'm very sure you know this street in Nairobi. We have the frontage zone, you can see just outside the shops, and we have, sometimes it can be used for placing your wares. Then you have an obstructed continuous pedestrian zone, very good in quality because you can even see the person in wheelchair does not need to be supported. Then you have the furniture zone with trees in between, and of course also leaving some space for people to access. This is another good example of a street in Nairobi. Again, very wide pedestrian realm. You can see even some women chatting on the street. And the moment you see a street with a lot of women, like Engineer Njeri mentioned about gender sensitive designs, women will not choose a street that is dirty or a street that is insecure. So at the moment you can see women comfortably chatting and they have their luggages there, that's a very safe street for everybody to use. Then in terms of universal access, streets need to be universally accessible. By this we mean that footpaths need to enhance that. And we've seen a lot of how people design footpaths. When you reach the property entrances, the footpath breaks and then continues after the gate. And for that reason, it's not, people using wheelchairs are not able to comfortably navigate through the street. So we need to ensure that there's a smooth gradient, that it's the cars going up and not the people going down. And I'll just show you an example. This is an example of a very good street in Dar es Salaam, where the vehicles are the ones going up. The footpath level is maintained such that it is very easy for people with disabilities to move around. Then we have to talk about pedestrian crossing. As you can see, these are a lot of people walking on the carriageway. Thank God there's traffic jam and they don't necessarily have to run across. But now you can imagine in terms of safety. These are clear indications that we need to provide safe pedestrian crossing in our streets and not footbridges. Sometimes you've seen a lot of investments happening around the city providing footbridges. Footbridges are not the best option. Number one, they're very expensive. They take a lot of land and many a time they end up obstructing. They take up a lot of space that would be dedicated for the footpaths. For example, you can see here, the footpath was there, then the footbridge during construction took over that space. And again, they're not universally accessible. And like Engineer Njeri mentioned, it's not comfortable for pregnant women, elderly, people carrying loads. As you can see here, it becomes very difficult. It's become this structure that obstructs. And for that reason, most people will not end up using it. Again, it takes a lot of time to cross. You know, if you're using a wheelchair, for example, and you have to use the, not the staircase, I don't know how to proceed, but uses the longer side because the gradient is done that will allow you to navigate using a wheelchair because there are no escalators. So what happens, you'll take longer. And because of that, some people are not very patient. They end up crossing directly on the carriageway. And because the vehicles are at high speed, assuming that there's a footbridge that pedestrians should use to cross, then accidents end up happening just near the footbridges. And again, you've seen what is happening along Mombasa Road now with the construction of the expressway. A lot of those footbridges are going down, meaning that that investment that was so expensive, again, just going down the drain. So we need to provide tabletop crossings. This raised zebra crossing, they're just elevated crossings. They're at the same level with footpaths, meaning that even if you're using a wheelchair, you do not have to go down to cross. you'll just be on the same level with the footpath, then cross to the other side. Again, because it is elevated, it acts as a traffic calming element, and the vehicles are able to slow down. Again, because it is raised, pedestrians as they cross, they are more visible to the oncoming vehicles. Then this is just a photo showing some of those, an example of our raised tabletop crossing. This is in Dar es Salaam again, very smooth. Pedestrians, you can see the carriageway is lower, but near the crossing, it is elevated to accommodate pedestrian crossings. So let the vehicles go up and I mean, they're not, they should actually, not the people going up and down. This is another example of raised zebra crossing. And I think you've seen a lot of them, at least I've seen some around Sarit Center, around University of Nairobi. Those are just some of the good examples of pedestrian raised tabletop crossings. So I want to go to the cycle tracks. So this is space now dedicated for the cycling. And for a cycle track should be elevated at 100 millimeter above the carriageway. This is to prevent stormwater drainage from accumulating, or when it is raining, we have a lot of stormwater that can hinder the cyclists from cycling during the rainy seasons. Again, it should be dedicated. Now you can see most of our streets do not provide for the cyclists. Most of our cyclists cycle on the carriageway, and it is not safe. The fact that this guy is looking behind means he's not comfortable. He may not know if any car is going to hit him from behind. So we need to ensure that our streets provide quality and comfortable cycling facilities. Then this is another example of lack of provision of cycling facilities. And one thing that happens, sometimes you'll see some cities providing some section across the cities, providing a cycle track and no footpath. So what happens, you'll see most pedestrians, instead of using the cycle track, instead of walking on the carriageway, which is obviously obvious, they will end up taking over the cycle track. So the moment you fail to provide a footpath and provide a cycle track, it is not going to work, because now the pedestrians will take over the space, meaning that the cyclist will still use the carriageway to cycle, exposing them to the risk of accidents. So we need to ensure that you provide both footpaths first, then cycle tracks. Otherwise, if you provide cycle track and no footpath, it will not work. Again, in terms of the surfacing material of a footpath, most of the ones you've seen across the city, they use cabros, the paving blocks, but they're not very comfortable. Most cyclists complain that they're actually bumpy, and because sometimes due to poor maintenance, like you can see in the photo on your top left, because of poor maintenance, some paving blocks come off and it becomes very uncomfortable for cycling. So we need to ensure that we have concrete or asphalt for our cycle tracks. And this is a very good example of in Dar es Salaam. We have this smooth, continuous cycle track dedicated. Of course, now you can see that for the footpaths, you can comfortably use cabros. But then for the cycle track, please avoid using cabros for the comfort of the cyclist. Again, when you distinguish the materials, it becomes very clear who is supposed to use what space. And that's why you can see a cycle, we do not necessarily have to have bollards, like the difference in the paving of material already sends a message that this is space for footpaths and this is space for the cyclists. Again, remember the minimum width should be 2 meters width, unobstructed for the comfort of cyclists. Again, it should be separated from the mixed traffic. Failure to do that, the vehicles will just come over and they'll take up the space for the cyclists, again, exposing them to the risk of accidents. This is a very good example. Again, in Nairobi, at least we are seeing some changes coming up. Good quality footpaths and cycle track. Again, now for some cities, this is Kisumu. What happened now, we have provided, the city has provided these pots, the flower pots, to segregate the cyclists from the mixed traffic. That enhances their safety. Then we go to the BRT. So of course we know BRT is the high quality, high capacity sort of form of public transport. And it is there to just enhance convenience, comfort of the users, and also enhance sustainability of the environment. It ensures that we move a lot of people at the least economic and environmental cost. So how we design our bus BRTs, we need to have, number one, you have to have the dedicated bus lanes. That's number one, pure dedicated bus lane that does not mix with any other form of traffic. Again, we have to have stations, secure stations for the passengers to board. They should really talk about having it level boarding so that even if you're using a wheelchair, you can comfortably get into the bus. The quality of the bus needs to be clean. They should have ample ventilation, and they should be, in terms of the fuel consumption, pollution standard, they also need to be very low. And then again, the BRT needs to be integrated with other modes of transport. So we need to ensure that BRT stations have access to, can be accessed by walking and cycling. And then we also need, we talk about the pre-board payments. You don't pay on board, you pay off board before you board the BRT. So this is just an example of a BRT station. You can see the level boarding I was talking about. So even if you have, you're using a wheelchair, you'll be able to get into the bus. Again, these are just some of the elements of the BRT that I've mentioned. And one thing we should note, that a BRT is just not about the lanes, and it has to be a whole system. You know, it has to include the buses need to be of high quality, not just dedicated lanes, and then you have old buses operating on the dedicated lane. Again, in terms of the stations, we need to provide station based on the population around that. And of course, when you're preparing service plan, you do a lot of study to determine the population that lives around there, and to project the demand to fit the station sizes. The other thing that we must have passing lanes. Failure to passing lane is an extra lane, a BRT lane just at the station. That ensures that a bus that was not meant to stop at that station can comfortably pass over, like overtake the one that is stopping. Failure to do that means that all the buses have to wait for the one ahead to move so that it can start going. So we need to ensure that we have passing lanes. Then I want to go to the bus stops. So for the bus stops, you've noticed that most of our cities do not provide adequate bus stops. Most people wait for the buses under hot sun, under hot scorching sun. And like if you look at this photo, you're boarding a matatu, you have to jump over an open drainage, which is very risky. And you can imagine if you're a woman or a child or somebody in a wheelchair, it becomes very inaccessible. So we need to ensure that we provide quality bus stops in designated places. You know what happens, we have failed to provide designated bus stops. And what happens is that matatus end up stopping just anywhere. And that causes a lot of congestion and conflict with other transport users. This is just how in terms of the location of the bus stop, it should not obstruct the footpath. It should be just like the carriageway, and then a clear walking space behind the bus stop. That means that it does not obstruct the cyclist, does not obstruct the pedestrian, and the passengers can just easily board the buses. So this is just an example of how we need to design our bus stops. Landscaping, and Rita said that we have landscape architects around, and we need to start thinking about the beautification of our streets. We need to ensure that we have ample trees, we have flowers. That street is just not for accessibility and mobility. It is also create an aspect of a public space, and that can come in so handy with landscaping. And I'll just talk about trees, for example. This is Gong Road. I think for those who've lived in Nairobi for long, you all may be familiar with Gong Road, the very big, beautiful trees that were there before. During the construction, all the trees were wiped out. And from what you can see, it was not necessary to cut down these trees when this road was being constructed. So we need to ensure that as we design our roads, as we implement our big infrastructure project, we do not cut down our trees. This is an example of Kisumu, how this is a new upgraded NMT facilities along Jomo Kenyatta Highway, and you can see that the trees were maintained. Design infrastructure around the trees, because these trees take a long time to grow. So cutting them down and you're not even replacing them make our street very ugly. Now you can imagine these streets without trees. And you can see these guys resting here because the trees provide the shade. It becomes a sort of carbon sink. They beautify the city. They make the city more beautiful and more exciting and inviting.
We seem to have lost you, Penina. We seem to have lost you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
Yes.
I'm back. Can you see my screen? Not yet. Should I reshare? Sorry about that. Internet issues, probably. Okay, you can see my screen?
Yes, please proceed.
Yes, we can.
So what was the last slide? I didn't notice and I was leaving.
The landscaping, the Kisumu.
Perfect. So I didn't miss a lot. So, sorry. So, landscaping. Oh, and the trees, I talked about the trees, designing our streets around the trees and ensuring that they're maintained. So I will go to the service lanes. So this is just the lane meant to access facilities on the side of the road. So they need to be of low speed. That's number one. And they need not to be continuous, because the moment you make them continuous, it becomes an alternative road. Why the speed is so important is because we also have a lot of pedestrian movement. And this is an example in Kisumu where the community has decided to come up with a temporary do-yourself traffic calming element. Because now, because of the traffic calming is not present, the vehicles and the bodabodas move so fast, and the community around feel that it is not safe for their children. So they end up putting such things. So we need to ensure that our service lane, the speed limits are very low. Then the other aspect is street lighting. So street lighting is to enhance safety and security. So we need to ensure that our streets are well lit. And finally, the street furniture. We need to ensure that we provide street furniture. This includes the benches, the water faucets, the garbage collection bins, and they need to be organized such that they do not obstruct the other street elements, the footpaths and all that. Then the stormwater drainage, we need to ensure that they are covered, but because the moment we leave them empty, number one, they're not safe. People easily slip in and fall. And again, maintenance becomes also very difficult because with the people throw in dirt inside. Then we also need to ensure that we have coordination of utilities. We've seen a lot of fiber optic. All the time when fiber optic cables are being installed, footpaths are destroyed. So we need to ensure we have a coordinated utility to ensure that we do not keep destroying our streets. I want to invite my colleague, Getao, to go on with the next step. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Penia, for the good presentation. Let me just share my slides. So can you see my slides?
Yes, you can proceed.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Penina, for the good presentation. I'm going to take you through the next chapter on the manual, and this is on the street templates. This chapter has given a combination of all the street elements that Penina has talked about, and it shows how you can combine the various elements to provide varying degrees of mobility within the urban context. Then the templates are provided in plan view and cross-section, and they've been provided in the increasing right of way from 6 meters, 9, 12, all the way up to 60 meters. Then there is a color code on each of the street templates. For the narrow streets, that is those with the right of way of 6 and 9. This can serve as a shared space where all the road users share the same space. Then as your right of way increases, you provide a separate space for your NMT, that is the provision of footpaths. Then is the provision of cycle tracks, the carriageway, and on some of the wide streets, you can provide the bus rapid transit. That is to cater for the mass transit by providing BRT. So this is an example of what you can achieve on a 6 and 9 meters right of way. These are the local streets where the speeds are quite low. You don't expect to have speeds of more than 15 kilometers per hour. And the motorized traffic together with the NMT road users can share the same space. Where you find that the drivers, the cyclists, and all the other people can share the same road space. It's always good to have some traffic calming measures so that you can be able to slow down your traffic. Then on wider streets, this is an example of what can be achieved on an 18 meters right of way. You can see on one side, there's provision for the motorized traffic, and they are sharing the same space with the cyclists. And on the extreme edges, you can see there is adequate provision of the footpaths, and these color yellow indicate the provision of the footpaths. Then it's always good to have your traffic calming measures to enhance, so that you can slow down the speed of vehicles. This is enhanced by providing the at-grade crossings in the form of tabletop crossings. And as Penina discussed, these are able to slow down the vehicles, and at the same time, they offer universal access for the physically challenged from one side of the street to the other. Another example of what you can achieve on 18 meters right of way, you can transform these corridor into a pedestrians and public transport one corridor by making provisions for the BRT in the median, and you can have your very wide walkways on the extreme edges. Another example of what can be achieved on 30 meters right of way, this is a very common scenario on most of our cities. For example, in Mombasa, most of the roads have a right of way of 30 meters. And this cross section shows the basic BRT corridor and what can be achieved on a basic BRT corridor. You can see it's possible to have provisions for your mass rapid transit by providing for the BRT in the median. Then you have 2 lanes on either side for the motorized traffic. And on your extreme edges, you can have adequate provisions for the non-motorized traffic by providing wide footpaths. So what happens in most of the cities, probably the population may not be that high or the demand may not be that high for the BRT. But in the future, there will be a high demand for BRT. So to avoid the future retrofit, it's always good to have that reservation in the median so that you can avoid the future retrofit. So it's always good to leave that reservation in the median so that you can have adequate provision of your BRT in the future. On the wider cross section, for example, this is on the 60 meters right of way. It's possible to have a provision for your BRT. You can have provision for the mixed traffic. Then there is adequate space for the cyclists. You've got a lot of landscaping by making provisions of trees, service lanes, which are to serve the local traffic and to serve the access. And on the extreme edges, there is a good and adequate provision for the NMT, together with the furniture zone and also provision of some nice and wide vending areas for your vendors. Then the other chapter is on the manuals given, talks about the intersections. And as you all know, intersections have always been points of conflict. There is always conflict between the through traffic, the motorized traffic. There's conflict with the cyclists, conflict with the pedestrians. And traditionally, the intersections were designed to handle faster movement of vehicles. But over the recent past, we've come to realize we need to cater about the issues of safety on our intersections, because these are the major points where most of the accidents occur. So the designs need to be, when you are designing your intersection, you need to have in mind the need of all road users. As you can see, this is an example along Ojijo Road, the junction of Ojijo Road and Thika Road. And you can see where the road markings were made. So pedestrians are expected to cross at this point. But what happens? You can see pedestrians always want to take the shortest route possible. And you can see what has happened to the grass in these islands. So when you're designing our junctions and intersections, we need to take care of we have to take care of the road users, that is the pedestrians and cyclists. Again, you can see on this lower edge, this is the cycle track, and once it gets to the junction, there is no continuity. So when planners or engineers are designing for intersection, there's always need to provide that continuity of what the road is. This is another example along Ngong Road. You can see there is a road sign. This is the proposal that was made. This is meant to be the cycle track, but you can barely cycle along this track. And you can see what has happened. The cyclists are forced to cycle along the carriageway, and you know our the behavior of our Kenyan drivers. They really respect the other road users. So when designing our junctions and our cycle tracks, there is need to have that continuity and uniformity to avoid these kind of scenarios on our roads. So this is a good example. This is in Barcelona of how the pedestrians have been catered for. That is by making pedestrians always they always make the direct crossings, and they always use the shortest route possible. And this has been enabled by, we've got some nice refuge islands in the middle of the carriageway so that pedestrians can be able to wait for the traffic lights to turn green, and then they can cross the road. This is another example along Outer Ring Road. You find that in most of our road junctions, we don't make provisions for the refuge islands. You can see this a person in a wheelchair. They are forced to share the same space. Also, the kids are forced to share the same space in the roundabout. So and on this side, on the left-hand side, you can see how the guardrails has been provided. And this space should be replaced, and we should have a nice refuge island so that people can have a waiting space as a way to cross from one side of the road to the other. So this is a good example along Lower Kabete Road. This is a project that was improved, and you can see there's a nice refuge island that has been provided. This creates a waiting area for people who are waiting to cross from one side of the road. And this is a good example of what should be achieved on some of our roads. Then another challenge we have at the intersections is we always have conflict between the through traffic and the right turning vehicles. And the best, some of the options of treating the right turning vehicles at the intersection, it's always good to avoid the right turns, because they end up delaying the through movement of the BRT buses. And as you can see, one of the options is to have 3 left turns, where the vehicles make the 3 left turns, and then they make the direct crossing at this point. Then the other option is to have a left turn together with a U-turn and then go straight. And then the third option is having the left turn plus 2 right turns. And this has been achieved in a neighboring country, in Tanzania. This is along one of the BRT corridors. You can see you've got so many road signs which are indicating that the right turns are prohibited. So this enables the efficiency of the buses and faster driving speeds of the buses as compared to, and it reduces the conflict between the right turning vehicles. As you can see, good road signs are provided, and the motorized traffic are prohibited from making the right turns. Okay, then looking at some of the possible transformations that can be achieved on our streets if we use the guidelines which have been proposed in this design manual. This is an example. This is the existing condition in our CBD. This is down along Moi Avenue. And you can see how the space has been provided. There's a lot of space which is provided for motorized traffic. You've got the matatus, the private cars. There's a lot of parking, perpendicular parking. In other areas, there is the angled parking. The footpaths have deteriorated, and there's no space for people to walk. So you can see vendors along the area, and the space is not quite organized. So if we took a better approach, a sustainable approach, and if we follow the recommendations in the street design manual, this is what can be achieved along the same corridor. This is one of the possible transformations around the corridor. We have a dedicated space for the BRT, and they are wide, nice and wide footpaths, some nice landscaping, and there is a space for the cyclist, some good crossings. And this is something which can be achieved in our city, that is in Nairobi. Another possible transformation, this is the existing condition along Thika Road near Muthaiga. As you can see, the number of lanes which were provided to facilitate the through movement of the private vehicles. But experience has shown that expanding our roads is not a sustainable solution to the traffic congestion. And a more sustainable approach to this corridor, what can be achieved along the same area, is if BRT was implemented along the corridor, this is what can be achieved. We can have the stations in the median and our buses together with the passing lanes, as Penina was explaining, and these passing lanes enhance the efficiency of the system by allowing the express services along the corridor. So this would be a better approach along the same corridor. Then if we continue designing our roads or designing our cities with a business as usual approach, what is going to happen? We will expand our roads. The traffic jams will always be there because we will end up attracting more vehicles. Then pollution, due to the emission from our vehicles, then the road deaths from accidents. And this is not going to be, this is not a sustainable approach. So the sustainable approach is where we design our cities with the mind of people. We need to design our cities for people. We need to add transit by making provision for the mass movement of people, add density, cut down on our parking to reduce the number of vehicles that are coming into our cities. And by so doing, we're going to have a better quality of life. Thank you all for your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabriel Gitau. So now we'll move on to the Q&A session. At least we appreciate your presentation so far. So now maybe we have our president here. I don't know whether she's still around, but she's not necessarily a panelist, but I'll engage her by virtue of the fact that AAK has been really keen on post-COVID interventions as far as urban scale and building scale solutions are concerned. So your presentation focuses, the ITDP presentation, or rather the sustainable urban transport model, focuses more on NMT infrastructure and related, rather large-scale investments in infrastructure. Nevertheless, we realize that such modes require high densities and mixed use in order to be practical and financially feasible. So maybe, I don't know whether our president is still around. Okay, I'll reserve that question for later on. So maybe I'll bring on board Engineer Justus. Engineer Justus is around?
Yeah, very much present. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, well, I would like to start by thanking ITDP for such a great presentation. It's quite detailed and insightful. I also want to thank the Town Planners chapter for organizing this webinar and inviting me to join this discussion. Just to bring some facts to fore, in 2014, Parliament doubled the debt ceiling to 2.5 trillion. And in October 2019, that was raised further to 9 trillion. And the current situation of external debt is at about 6.5 trillion, that is odd. And the reasons for these increases are infrastructural development projects. That is the main reason. I think we are aware of several of those very expensive projects. So the move from, the street design manual is a breath of fresh air, I must say, because when you move from the principle of designing for vehicles, and you move now into a people-centered situation where you are designing to move as many people as possible and not as many vehicles as possible, then I believe that design is definitely more sustainable and more efficient. And it is true that there's no amount of widening of infrastructure, expansion of infrastructure that can address congestion problems. That much has been established. So this manual is also very welcome, considering the situation in the industry where we really don't have a current design manual for urban roads. What we have are drafts and guidelines which are in use. So I hope that this particular manual sees the light of day. It is completed, adopted, and implemented. And I'm happy that it's being undertaken in conjunction with the Ministry of Infrastructure. So I believe that there's a lot of light at the end of the day. And we are aware of the Nairobi Expressway that is basically almost beginning. I understand also Thika Road BRT is also almost beginning. And I want to support that the design principles that have been embraced in this street design manual be used. I like the issue of prioritizing safety, designing for efficiency, universal access, and particularly the modal hierarchy where you say give pedestrians priority and cyclists. In any case, 80% of the Kenyan population, 80% of the taxpayers will either walk to work or use public transport. So why spend their money on expanding infrastructure that is meant for less than 15% of the population that uses private personal cars to
Okay, thank you, Engineer Justus. So I'll bring in Klana.
James, you're muted.
Okay, sorry for that. I'm saying I'll bring in Klana Constant Cap. Klana Constant, through the presentation, there has been an emphasis on mass transportation of people, and particular focus on BRT. But generally, the focus of BRT is vertical equity, where we see that we want to achieve progressive benefiting of the poorer population within the urban environments. But studies from other countries have shown that while it offers significant benefits to lower income groups, the same is skewed towards medium and medium income users. So it's really less progressive. Maybe what do you think are the primary reasons as to why BRTs are not necessarily progressive as would have imagined?
Thanks a lot, James, for this opportunity and fantastic presentations by the three people from ITDP. There's a very interesting angle that we have to take note of that applies a lot in planning. And we call these 4 genomas of planning. And they're particularly important especially in metropolitan planning, which is kind of related to what we call regional or territorial planning, where you're not just planning for the city, but you're planning for the city and its environs. And these 4 genomas, the first one is the social genoma, which aims at social equity and tries to bring an approach of ensuring that the disenfranchised are taken care of. That when we look at things like social housing, environmental sustainability also comes there. Some of the things mentioned, like taking care of women, the needs of women, taking care of the poor, persons with disability, and children. Then the second genoma, which is the economic genoma, tends to drive towards efficiency, more inclined with economic return. And at times, this one tends to kind of look only from the perspective of figures and return of investment. So these 2 genomas tend to be in conflict with each other, the social and the economic genome. And both of them, depending on the direction you skew, your third genoma, which is the physical genoma, and talks a lot about physical infrastructure. The physical genoma will incline towards the particular of the 2 genomas that you direct yourself to. So you can end up moving too much towards the social genome or too much towards the economic genome. So the fourth one now comes in, which is what brings an equilibrium to all of them, which is the governance genome. So the kind of governance you have now will be able to create that equilibrium between your social genome, your economic genome, and the kind of physical infrastructure that you want within your city, your even at town level, city level, metropolitan level. And there you're able to meet the needs of the people, okay, the day-to-day needs of the people, as well as the bigger needs of your urban area, because we know that urban areas have multiple needs. When you're doing land use allocation, you're thinking about a neighborhood and how to design a neighborhood, but you're also thinking, where are we going to put our international airport? Okay, we can't say we're not going to have airports, no. We're going to think, where are we going to put our university that's going to have influence from people from all over the country, or even all over the region in some cases, or the continent. So and this is where these kind of guidelines, as well as good planning, comes in, because you're able to analyze when and where to utilize them well. And when you move towards a metropolitan scale, it may require that you also look towards other modes of mass rapid transit. It may, because now you're not at metropolitan scale, you will not be looking at what we call the urban unit, which is, the town or neighborhood scale, which tends to be, governed by a municipal level, but now you're looking at a much greater scale. So the scales at which you look at different things will bring out the best efficiency from all of them. So we can't dismiss, that's why you cannot dismiss any mode of travel. You cannot dismiss, you have to recognize the efficiency of BRT up to a certain number of users, which unfortunately I don't have that statistic here. You have to recognize in line, of course, with the land use management. You have to also recognize the level at which you move towards light rail if necessary, and of course you have to remember the importance of non-motorized transit at all scales, which you're talking walking, cycling, especially at the smaller scale, and try to keep people moving as short distances as possible, so as to avoid the necessity for a lot of travel.
Okay, thank you very much, Planner Constant. So maybe I'll bring on board Engineer Njeri. Engineer Njeri, this might be a provocative question. Okay. But we already have existing documents relating to, or rather guiding the institution of transport and transport planning, the creation of infrastructure facilities. We also have quite a number of organizations dealing with the same. We have Kura, Kenha. Would you say we are reinventing the wheel by creating a street design manual?
Actually, yeah, we recognize that there are existing manuals. Actually, there is a series of manuals, and we have even listed them in the draft. So this manual comes in to provide a guideline, a standard for the urban street design. That is what there has been a gap all along. And that is why our streets are often designed like rural roads, which are just providing for the vehicles and not taking care of pedestrians and the public transport. It has been a gap. So this manual is going to be used as part of the series of manuals by the ministry. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So maybe I'll go back to Engineer Justus. I don't know whether you can hear us. Engineer Justus? Okay, while we wait, I think he's having problem with connecting. Engineer Justus, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Sorry, I lost a network somewhere along the way.
It's okay, no problem.
Yes, and I hope I missed a lot because I'm at the risk of repeating myself.
No problem.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's the one major problem in transport within the country is the idea of traffic congestion and the whole over-reliance on motorized transport. So other countries as Singapore and UK have introduced coercive pricing mechanisms, such as the certificate of entitlement. Do you think it's the way to go for Kenya?
I think having been in this industry for quite some time, that the situation is well known. I would advocate for mass rapid transport systems, such as is being developed, like the BRT. And you know, it is at quite some stage because there's going to be several, I think, actually 5 lines. Probably Jerry can clarify that. One on Thika Road, one on Mombasa Road, and so on and so forth. I think those mass rapid transit systems will substantially reduce the problem of congestion, because if I am sure that I can board a bus at point A and be at point B in 10 minutes, I can leave my car at home and board that bus. Yeah, but if I have to get into this matatu, wait for it to fill up, and you know, all this traffic congestion along the way, it is not known. From say at the river to town center, you could take, when there's no traffic, you could probably take 20 minutes. Yeah, when there's no traffic, so Kimau to town center, about 16 or 20 kilometers. Now, from the airport, you take 40 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes from Kisumu on a flight to JKIA. Now, from JKIA to the CBD will take you probably 1.5 hours or 2 hours in traffic congestion. It doesn't help the situation. So I believe even this congestion that is being caused by lots of personal cars on the roadway can be reduced when people are assured of a safe and reliable means of transport, where you are sure that I can get to my appointment within a certain time. Yeah, and so that would be my view on that. I also support the issue of promoting non-motorized transport. Something is already happening in the CBD. You know, actually across our road network, you'll find NMT is more or less ignored. You know, we just design for cars. Yeah, no footpaths, no walkways. I was involved in a project in Nairobi, Eastleigh, dualing of General Arwinge, Karioko, and the First Avenue Eastleigh, which is a main street through Eastleigh. And those who are in Eastleigh understand the kind of congestion and hawkers and all that, you know, mess that is there. Yeah, motorized and non-motorized traffic. And we designed some footpaths and cycle tracks, 2 meters each. And of course, now what ended up happening is because of lack of regulation, you find that those matatus are now on the walkways. Yeah, and you find that hawkers have occupied half the carriageway is occupied by hawkers. If you go to First Avenue Eastleigh, you'll be surprised. 2 lanes each way, but one of the lanes is actually a hawking lane. Yeah, so we have not designed adequately for vending spaces to take care of the need. You know, our designs should be demand driven. Yeah, you know that you have to take care of hawkers. Can you provide the design for adequate vending spaces? That's alluded to in this design manual. But what I wanted some clarification is how do you then determine the required capacity, you know, in terms of the adequacy of the space? There has to be something to do with that. And even in terms of walkways, if you say 2 meters, of course, you know, you can widen to maybe 4 meters, whatever, depending on the volumes. But then how do you then relate the two? So that you say that if the pedestrian volume is at 500, provide 2 meters. If it is at maybe 2,000, provide 4 meters, something like that. I know that, you know, you can't look at it in isolation, as Jerry has said. You have to also, you know, look at the guidelines alongside other existing manuals, and many other countries have detailed manuals. We have the Highway Capacity Manual, ETC, yeah, which designers refer across. But as a matter of national policy, I think it is important that we have our own manual, our own homegrown manual that solves our own local problems. It's like local solutions to our local problems, because we are the wearers of the shoe, we know where it pinches. And then as the Institution of Engineers of Kenya, you know, engineers under that umbrella, and even the ones in AAK, you know, we adopt and advocate for this, so that whatever design you are doing, yeah, whatever urban design you are doing, we know this is the standard. So that the implementing agency, when they want to approve your design, they check against a standard. Have you met the design standards? You get, yeah? But if the design standards are not set in policy, then you find someone designs according to Ethiopian standard, another one highway capacity manual of the US, another one, you know, another one, there's some draft manuals also in existence, one developed by the former Ministry of Local Government. So when you have these many manuals around, then it gives discretion. And then what ends up happening is that because of budgetary constraints that we deal with on a day-to-day every year, you find that you find these are nice designs, always, and all these, yeah, this is very nice, but we don't have the money to implement this design. Yeah. So you cut off. No, now what happens is NMT suffers. Yeah. It suffers. So, you know, cycle tracks are removed and what, because now we want to fit your link within the available budget. So, well, now those are my comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, engineer. While at it,
we seem to have lost you, James.
Please unmute, James.
Okay. Yes, taking on from what engineer said as far as provision of infrastructure is concerned, Penina, the use of infrastructure provision as far as NMT and related transport infrastructure is really reliant on behavioral urbanism, where you realize that however much you provided a street vending space, we'll always have the street vendors getting into maybe pedestrian spaces and all. Of course, they appreciate their business thrives in areas where there is high traffic of people. Maybe, do you think Kenyans are ready for such infrastructure?
You know, vendors, personally, this is actually my personal opinion on this. Number one, they provide a very essential services in terms of providing easy goods just on the street as on your way home. But at the same time, we all agree that they encroach our street spaces. So for me, I talk about it being like, as you enjoy your right, respect other people's rights. So we need to know where is that right space. So if personally my business was to go to the CBD and get a matatu to go wherever I was going, then I wouldn't, having vendors across my path is an obstruction. But there are also some people who will just go to town simply to shop from them. So for us, it's about how do we integrate the two users, the pedestrians, to have efficient and obstructed walking space, at the same time have vendors still on the street space. And maybe some of the slides that we shared did not show a very good illustration of how the two uses can be integrated, but to talk about having the vendors being accommodated on the street furniture zone, because we have some space in between, so the vendors can still display their wares. At the same time, they're not obstructing the pedestrian. At the same time, they have also not obstructed the shop people. They're not just outside the shops, because we've seen a lot of conflicts just recently in Isili, where hawkers were just outside the main shops. They're not paying rent, probably the tax, they're not paying business permits. They were even selling more because the street space has higher pedestrian volume. They are closer to the customers than the people in the buildings. So basically it's about integrating the two users at the same time. Yes. I don't know whether Engineer Jerry can comment on that.
Yes, I can comment on that. About vendors, it's an issue that we have to confront. Very many of our people are deriving their daily incomes from vending. And we cannot take them from the streets and take them to some market somewhere and assume that they are going to just stay there and our streets are going to be nice and comfortable. It's not going to work because their customers are on the street. So even if we take them away, they're going to come back. So my take on that is that, first of all, we start engaging them, talking to them and agreeing, how are we going to go about this? And one way is to provide the dedicated space on the streets and allow them to operate within, it can even be marked, the vending zone, so that they do not overflow onto the pedestrian zone. The second proposal is that we can have some of the streets closed to pedestrians and vendors. And we can have certain times of the day, maybe from 5 o'clock, you can close some of the streets, and especially the streets with very high pedestrian traffic, because the pedestrians are the customers for the vendors. They can be closed maybe at 5 o'clock, no vehicles. And then you can have vendors and pedestrians. It becomes like a market, or even on Saturdays. Then we should have some agreements, or the city should have some agreement with the vendors. Maybe they should be having regular meetings with the vendors. I'm sure they have some associations, the officials, and agreeing that these vendors are not just going to leave garbage on the road. They're going to clean up the space when they finish their business. So I'm sure if we treat the vendors well, they are going to start being better partners. We try to accommodate them in the whole setup. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you too. Now, maybe I'll take it back to Planner Constant Cap. In recent times, planners have received a beating, rather some sort of accusation as to them not participating in the whole process of road designs and related infrastructure. Do you think that the role of planner has been forgotten, or is it that the planners themselves have taken a backseat?
Thank you. Very, very interesting question. But before I go that, I just want to make a comment on the previous discussion on markets. Just to give you some statistics from the city, from Nairobi at least. Now, best practice, occasionally we tend to say that a city should, for every 40,000 people, we should at least have one market. 40,000 people could be, at maybe ward or sub-ward level, depending on the population of the area. Now, that would mean that at least for 4.5 million people, we're talking about maybe about 115 markets, approximately, yeah? Now, at the moment, according to the CIDP of the city, in the case of Nairobi, we have only about 40 markets. Now, that's a huge deficit of, slightly under 100, which kind of explains to you where this spatial conflict tends to emerge. So there is that an aspect that a lot of market land has been grabbed. That's visible in the Ndungu report, and if you talk to quite a number of neighborhoods, they'll tell you that. And also the fact that with emerging neighborhoods, this has not been taken into consideration. And that is evident. The city was trying to pass an informal vendors and pop-up markets bill recently, and that kind of links to what Engineer Mburu has just talked about, where you could allow markets to spill over on key NMT corridors. Okay, some form of licensing where that could be allowed, and is one of the attempts that have been done in some cities. Some cities have merged that with complete street closures to allow NMT, non-motorized transit, to pass, and opening of markets. That also kind of links to what the question you've asked me, which is, have planners been ignored or forgotten? I mean, there are a couple of, it's a mix of the two, depending on how you look at it. One of the challenges we have in our country, I can say, is just the sheer number of levels of governance we have as far as transport is concerned. Okay? At national level, you have State Department, you have NTSA, you have Kenya Police, KENHA, KRB, NEMA, then you have KURA, you have NAMATA, you have County Roads Department, County Physical Planning Department, Ministry of Physical Planning and Land Use. So you have all that, and all that ends up ends up at times with overlapping, or some authorities having more kind of, taking over the roles of others. I think there was a recent mention by the former Prime Minister, who talked about how we, some roads are supposed to be devolved to county level, so as to link that with physical planning, which is a devolved function, but many of them are still being done at national level. So you have Kenya Urban Roads Authority, that is a national body running road infrastructure, and then you also have different counties also have their physical planning departments, and you end up, with the so-called bigger body just trying to overlay and do whatever you want. We've seen recently with the expressway that was mentioned, where the Kenya Highways Authority simply decided this highway belongs to us, and therefore we're taking it. So there is a bit of a mix between the two. There's also a political aspect, because roads are very political tool, especially for political mileage. We also saw a similar clash in rail transport. I think the French government stated that they were going to do a rail to the airport, and there was a fight between different authorities over who takes over it. So there's that governance element, again, as I gave in my first discussion, that the governance is critical, so as to get that full equilibrium in as far as who takes care of what particular angle. However, we also are recognizing a new, I would call it a new profession emerging. It's not new, but it's been there, but we're beginning to see a lot more of urban design emerging as, and landscape architecture emerging as professions on their own. And these are critical, especially for that smaller scale, when it comes to things to do with non-motorized transit, public space, okay, complete streets. That, since it's done at a much smaller scale, but we're ending up to have more people actually advocating to that, and this is some of the progress we are seeing today. Because, and sorry, I'll just take just one more minute, because when you go to, for instance, when we talk about avoid, shift, improve, you may have heard of avoid, shift, improve, which is a guideline, a framework generally used to improve urban mobility. There's avoid the need and reduce the need for travel, and that is mainly done through physical planning and land use management. So you locate your schools, your housing, your shops, your market, your dispensary near each other, or even workplaces, so that people don't need to travel very long distances. Then shift comes in when we say shift to other more efficient means, which is, for instance, public transport, reducing the necessity for people to drive private cars, over long distances. And we've talked earlier on about BRT, we've talked about commuter rail and such. And then, of course, improve, which is, how do we improve the efficiency also of some of these means, technological-wise, in the use of smart technologies, etc. And within all this, of course, comes the element of social justice once again. We recently came up with some pillars of social justice public transport. How available is it? How accessible? How inclusive? How equitable? And how sustainable? So planners have got to find their way to end up being the ones calling the shots, because if transport, you cannot substitute transport from land use. People are moving from one point to another, whether we like it or not, and that is determined by land use.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So maybe I'll bring in Gabriel Gitau, recognizing and appreciating the whole idea of planning being a political activity, and it being influenced by social-economic factors. Achieving sustainable sustainable transportation requires massive financial investment. How do we find a balance to ensure that such costs do not translate to the common mwananchi? Taking, for instance, the Nairobi Expressway, where, of course, citizens would be charged pay tolls amounting up to 600 bob per day to use the said infrastructure. How do we find a balance to ensure that the huge finances invested into achieving sustainable transport are not translated back to the user?
Thank you, James, for the good question. Regarding the financial issue, one of the challenges you find is that most of these are investments which are being made. The numbers, the figures talk for themselves. More than 60% of people are living in the informal settlements. Then we find like about 40% of people are using, more than 40% are using public transport and also relying on walking and cycling as their main mode of transport. Whereas in some of the cities, like in Mombasa, you find like only 3% of the people own the car. And yet, when it comes to the investments, emphasis is only done for the minority of people who are owning the cars, and majority of the road users are not given priority. So there's need to shift from making investments, making the huge investments that are not going to benefit the majority of the people. They need to have that equity in the distribution of resources and wealth. And most of the projects, more emphasis should be done to projects that are going to benefit the majority of the people, as opposed to the projects that's going to benefit minorities of the people. Yeah, so there's need to shift from having prioritizing projects that are not going to benefit the masses. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe just two last questions, then I'll be taking voice questions from the attendees in the interest of time. So my first question would go to our AAK Town Planners Chapter Chair. AAK has been at the forefront we recently launched a handbook for post-COVID management as far as urban spaces and building scale is concerned. Maybe in your opinion, of course, NMT and related infrastructure would be more feasible in crowded environments, but in our handbook, we'd prefer less crowded and less dense urban environments. What in your opinion, what do you think is the best approach to take post-COVID?
Thank you, James, for that question. Just to mention again that we as AAK have our committee which is working on the COVID-19 task force. And one of the things that we were actually looking at is the issue of public spaces and streets, especially with regards to non-motorized transportation. And as you said, in this time where everyone is viewing the other person as a source of contagion or a source of possible transmission of the COVID-19, then we really have to go back to the drawing board in terms of not only how we design our streets, but also in terms of also how we distribute our activities across space, so that we are able to decongest or minimize the need for people to physically, especially be in very busy urban setups. our CBD, for example, in Nairobi. We have to think of how, and you can already see a lot of innovation that is already going on in terms of even deliveries, yeah? In places where we now have shopping be delivered in your house, for example, so you don't have to necessarily go to the supermarket. But I'm seeing a scenario where even post-COVID, we really have to lobby and advocate for policies that would enable us shift from people traveling long distance, as my colleague Constant has said, and also to really like support enabling services. We forget that once we don't have good schools near our neighborhood, we have to move. We forget that once we don't have job spaces, once we are advocating for the gated community that only advocate for only residential, we are forcing people to move to go for employment elsewhere. So all these aspects are things that have to be looked at. And I look at a scenario where we have to work together as professionals and integrate our ingenuity in terms of engineering, planning, landscape architecture, even environmental aspects, so that we can achieve an environment which is more conducive. And I actually saw one of our participants really like bringing up the issue of pollution, because it's also affecting our immunity. So all these aspects have to be brought up and integrated in terms of how we look at our space post-COVID-19. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Now to our attendees, if you wish to raise a question, you just raise your hand, then we'll be able to unmute you to ask your question. So there's a bit of, maybe this would go to Engineer Justus. Engineer Justus?
Present.
Yes. Now, in my transport planning class, I was taught that high-speed motorways are not supposed to necessarily be directed directly towards urban areas, but we've seen it as a constant problem in most urban, or rather road designs within our urban areas. It tends to sort of be a contributor.
Sorry, James, you might,
I come back.
Sorry, James, you might have to repeat because I think some network issues. So I didn't get you quite clearly as you started. So if you can please just reiterate.
Okay, I was saying, in my transport planning class, I was taught that high-speed motorways are not supposed to be disengaged in urban areas. But I see that most of our urban design, or rather the roads designed in our urban areas, we take an example of the Thika superhighway, the now coming up Nairobi Expressway. We still have that major problem of us bringing high-speed traffic into our urban areas. Maybe what strategies do you think we can adopt to sort of reverse such trends?
Well, I hope you can hear me because I'm having some network issues. Can you hear me well?
Yes,
James?
Yes, we can hear you.
If I got you well, you want to know why we are allowing high-speed traffic into our urban, urban centers. Was that your question?
Yes.
Now, I think we all understand the challenge that we have with our Kenyan, should I say, Kenyan driving habits. So that, even you have this good car and you're on Thika superhighway and you are being restricted to 50 kilometers per hour, it becomes a bit of a challenge. Now, there has been an attempt to solve that problem. So that there's, if you on Thika superhighway, you notice that we have service lanes and we have lanes for through traffic, which is supposed to expected to move at higher speeds. And then we have service lanes for local traffic that is expected to move at slow speeds. Yeah, of course, in terms of crossing, you've seen the footbridges and stuff like that. Because to cross a high lanes for through traffic moving at high speed, you cannot cross at grade. So you have to use your footbridge to the other side. So there's an attempt to address, there was an attempt to address that in the design of thicker road that way, by separating low-moving traffic from fast-moving traffic. So there was that attempt. But again, our driving habits, it is also an issue of law enforcement, because even if you were to put speed limit signs, and I can tell you, and we all know, that people hardly respect speed limit signs. So the only way that can happen is to introduce what is now speed calming measures, physical barriers, you know, in terms of elevated, you know, bumps, ramps, and stuff like that, speed humps, to slow down traffic. And those speed humps are designed in such a way that the humps, if you try to go at about 60, 70, you'll have a problem. It will be uncomfortable. So you are forced to slow down so that you can be able to go over the speed hump at a low speed. Those are the kind of measures that Kenyans understand. And of course, there are many other measures that can be put in place. You can use speed cameras and stuff like that, so that we improve the capacity of the police to be able to track down and penalize speeding motorists. And of course, you know, there's the corruption bit that comes in. So if we can have instant fines, you know, which you pay by mobile transfer, for instance, yeah, you don't give the traffic cop. Yeah, he charges you and you do an instant fine and you pay. Maybe those measures might work better. Otherwise, you'll just give him 100 bob, 200 bob, and you'll continue at whatever speed you want without a care. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Engineer. On to our last question, and this I directed to Engineer Njeri. Someone is asking, ITDP, I don't know whether this is an official statement from ITDP, supporting the existence of the BRT lane in the middle of the Thika superhighway. Within the same question, another attendee is asking as to whether the lines that were drawn and quote unquote BRT lane, are they really practical? And if no, is there a way we can incorporate BRT into the Thika road?
Thank you, James. Yes, we recommend that the BRT, the dedicated lanes for the buses, should be in the median. And the reason why we recommend as such is because when you place the buses in the median, there is no interference. There are no vehicles crossing in front of the buses as they move. And that way you are able to achieve high movement, very fast movement of the buses, and you are able to make the system very efficient. Secondly, you are able to reduce the conflict between the buses and the mixed traffic. So placing the buses in the median is really giving full priority to transporting people, not cars. And that is why, like you saw in the Dar es Salaam system, you'll find that if somebody boards a BRT bus, they'll be able to reach their destination so much faster than somebody who opts to drive their car, because the person who opts to drive their car will get caught up in the traffic jam. But if you are using the bus, you can be able to move quite fast. So the BRT is designed with features that enable the system to be as efficient as possible. One is the dedicated lanes in the median. The second one is the access to the buses. The level of the bus, the floor of the bus is the same level as the floor of the station. And people are able to board and alight from the bus very fast. Another aspect is off-board payments. The fare collection is off-board, so that it makes it so much easier and more efficient for the system to work. I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Engineer Njeri. Now, in the interest of time, I would like to bring the webinar to an end. Kindly, for those who've posted their questions, just in case they have not been responded, we'll be sharing them with our respective panelists to respond to you via email. So at this juncture, I'd wish to invite our CEO, the AAK CEO, to give us a vote of thanks.
James, thank you very much. It has been a very, very insightful discussion this afternoon. We've had some very good attendance from the participants, and I want to thank all of you for taking time to join us this afternoon. Just shows that this is a very important element. Urban mobility remains a very, very important aspect of our lives. And even going by the level of investments by the government on the infrastructure shows that we need to have these discussions more often so that we can make our effort to shape the way we invest in the infrastructure that will support our mobility as residents in urban areas of Kenya. I would just want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for making this possible. And first of all, I want to thank the ITDP for your effort in making this plan and for making it public and publicizing it as much as possible. Together with the AAK Town Planners chapter led by Planner Juliet Ritter, our cooperation has made this possible, and we actually value to the members and participants who are attending today. I also want to take this chance to thank all the panelists today, Engineer Nasi Njeri and the team from ITDP, including Penina Ndegwa and Gabriel Gitao. You made some very detailed and comprehensive presentation this afternoon, and I believe that is something that is going to support and help our members and public as well to understand what it takes to have a properly thought out public transport system. I also want to thank Constant Cap, also for very useful contribution to this discussion this afternoon. Constant is a very well-known urban activist, so to speak, but thank you very much for your participation this afternoon, Constant. Engineer Justus Otwani, thank you very much for taking time to join us. Your input has been very valuable for the webinar today. Thank you so much for that. Also to thank everyone who joined us this afternoon. We had more than 100 participants in this webinar. It's definitely a clear success. We clap for all of us. It's been very, very useful. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward for you to participate in a subsequent event. To James Odongo, our moderator, thank you. You very ably moderated this session. Thank you for guiding this discussion this afternoon. And I want to say to all of us, let's all enjoy the rest of the afternoon, and hope to see you again soon in the coming AAK webinars. Thank you all, and God bless you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.